I didn't think about education at all when I built the prototype. I was thinking about my master's thesis, for example. That's why I built it for, and that's what I built it for, and how to build cool technology to allow you to access a virtual machine through the browser. And just seeing this focus on education and thinking about from there how we can acquire users and how we can keep them, how we can keep their retention and how we can grow it and scale it, reduce our costs. That was a lot of, for sure, a huge learning experience for me.
Welcome to another episode of the Elevate podcast. I'm your host, Delaney McGuire. Here on the show, we're all about products and people who make an impact. We interview VCs, entrepreneurs, tech leaders, product leaders, anyone building a business, building a mission around something that delivers a ton of value to people and creating a ton of income along the way. Today on the show, we have Minko Gechev. Minko is a product lead at Google for the Angular project, which is an open source project. We'll get into that in a minute. He also was the CTO of Rhyme.com, which was later acquired by Coursera. So in this awesome conversation today, we dig into not only what it looks like to build and scale and sell a technology company as a coder, but also what it's like to be the product lead on a product that's used by over almost 3 million developers. So if you're in tech of Angular, it's one of the most popular coding frameworks. I knew almost nothing about it. I'd heard of it, but I didn't know much about it. So a lot of this conversation is just really understanding like, what is the value proposition of open source, but also as the technology founder, what does it look like to scale and have millions of people using your products, which is really fascinating. So hope you enjoyed this conversation with Minko. Let's jump straight in. All right, Minko, welcome to the show. So glad to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So we connected on LinkedIn. I saw your background with the work you're currently doing at Google, and I'm really excited for you to share that in a moment here. You're also, or prior to your work at Google, you're the CTO of Rhyme, which I think there's going to be a really interesting opportunity to chat about that. Why don't you just start by giving us a little bit of background of maybe start with your prior role as CTO? What did you guys accomplish there? I know you had a big exit. You guys sold to it was Coursera, I believe, and then you took a role with Google. So yeah, why don't you just walk us through that journey a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So my journey is very connected to open source. Since I was in college, I was really excited about open source products and I was trying to build something that gets some traction externally, mostly developer products. And around this, I was doing a lot of like sharing of my knowledge that I was building up. And after an internship at VMware, someone left a comment on my blog saying, "Looks like you have a lot of computer science background. Do you want to work for this startup in San Mateo and just move to California from Bulgaria?" And I'm sure that's a spam message because nobody leaves a blog message like a comment on your blog inviting you to just go to Silicon Valley. But yeah, we ended up starting working together, and I joined just like an engineer working on a product like an online educational game for kids. And after a couple of years, I visited their office in San Mateo and turned out that it is actually a venture capital company that is incubating different startups inside. And from there, I kept building my open source projects, and one of them was kind of virtualization in the browser, just showing different virtual machines that you can run and access directly in the browser. Let's say you want to use Photoshop, you can just log into your computer that doesn't have Photoshop installed, and you open your browser and you get access to Photoshop. And that was like back in 2012, 2013. So I went to the VC funds and they saw my open source project that I've been moving forward in my spare time. And they were thinking, like, we can turn that into a business. So we had the managing partner of the venture capital fund. We had one of the startup founders that they had. And yeah, we started prototyping. It was originally only me. And I ended up hiring more engineers in Bulgaria. So we started scaling this product up. And this turned out to be Rhyme. That's how Rhyme started. So we kept building it for a couple of years. We were getting a lot of interest from a lot of companies. And also our infrastructure cost was growing because running all these hundreds, sometimes thousands of virtual machines, that was costing a lot of credits in AWS back then. And we were solving a really big problem for Coursera. We were keeping our users really engaged. So what the product was doing was you get your virtual machine in the browser, and you have a guide who has the exact same copy of a virtual machine. You have identical environments. This was solving one of the problems for at workshops where you need to make sure that everyone has the same environment, the same version of Photoshop, the same operating system, which sometimes it's not trivial. It sucks to go to a training and spend an hour and a half setting up your environment or getting the right licenses. So we're solving this problem pretty well. And another thing, also the engagement, because there was a connection between the guides, the teacher, and the students all the time. The guide was able to see what the students were doing in the virtual machine. They were able to take over and help them out, let's say, move to the complete the challenge or talk to them and give them guidance. And so we had this connection between the guide and the student and from the student to the guide, which is something that was missing in Coursera, where you mostly get the guides or the teacher telling you something in a video, which increases the drop rate, unfortunately. And with Rhyme, we were providing this missing piece, and it turned out that there was an opportunity for us to work closer together. And Rhyme turned out to be the first acquisition of Coursera back in 2019.
Nice. Very cool. I definitely have a few follow-up questions on that. And first off, congratulations to be part of a startup that ended up getting acquired. That's got to feel really good. Big
Yeah,
accomplishment.
I was happy to see also the product having the opportunities to grow even more and having like access to bigger audience. I recently actually talked to a recruiter just online, and he was telling me how he graduated one of the Rhyme courses, which was good validation just to meet personal people on the internet
Yeah,
who took your course, like
that's
took a course on your platform.
that's so cool. Very interesting. I have further questions about this specifically, but I almost want to track back and just ask you a personal question. So you're in Bulgaria. You got this message to come to the United States. I'm curious for you. What did you think? Because I'd have to imagine there were some preconceptions of what it would be like. I feel like Silicon Valley is very romanticized, and that's how you make it when you get to Silicon Valley. So I'm curious for you, what was that experience like of leaving your home country, coming here, and starting to like really dig into like the VC world?
Yeah, first I thought it's a joke, as I said to you, and also the person who messaged me, he said, "Let's start working together from April 1st, and we can figure it out from there." And I was thinking, yeah, that's like April's. And ended up working really well. We had a great partnership on this product. I was originally hesitant to move full time in Silicon Valley. Now I live in San Francisco, but back then I really loved my life in Bulgaria. Had my family nearby, and we have a thriving tech community there. I'll say even like closer tech community. We knew each other and just felt very personal. And so I was originally hesitant, but at a certain point, just saw how a lot of things always in Silicon Valley are like advancing in way faster pace and how much innovation is happening here. Definitely did not align with my original idea. I didn't expect to see all the homelessness also that we have around. And
Ser-
this turned out to be a major issue.
Yeah, that's wild. I appreciate you sharing that. So similarly, it sounds like there's clearly been various stages of this project, and I'm curious of what it's been like for you on that journey because it started out as a project that only you were working on. It got picked up, it funded. I'm curious, and I think this is where we really have an opportunity to like create some parallels with anyone listening who might be working on an early startup or really no matter where they're at in this journey, they could probably gain some curiosities or insights from you. How did your frame on how you like whether it's manage a team, manage the technology product, like what were some of the biggest either like personal growth experiences or learnings you've had of going through this evolution of tiny little baby project to a lot of momentum behind it and now there's team and now I'm CTO of this like bigger entity. What did that require from you and what did you learn throughout that journey?
Yeah, quite a few things. So I was really excited about the technology at first. I didn't care too much about the business that we can build around it or about the use cases as much. So seeing how people who had way more like business experience than me at a point, they were able to find applications and build this product into something that is actually usable and applies to a particular domain. I didn't think about education at all when I built the prototype. I was thinking about my master's thesis, for example. That's why I built it for, and that's what I built it for, and how to build cool technology to allow you to access a virtual machine through the browser. And just seeing this focus on education and thinking about from there how we can acquire users and how we can keep them, how we can keep their retention and how we can grow it and scale it, reduce our costs. That was a lot of, for sure, a huge learning experience for me. Also, as you mentioned, like building a team, started valuing more building relationships and growing communication skills. By that point, I was just, yeah, just a solo developer building everything. It was exciting for sure. I built a lot of technical expertise this way, but also we couldn't scale with just having one engineer. There's this concept of a 10x engineer in the tech community. Even a tech 10x engineer that can like ship your products, and especially if the scope grows increasingly, and you need to constantly iterate to align to like where the business is heading and where the industry is. And that's where I learned a lot about some of my mistakes. For example, in Rhyme when I joined Google, where they have a really good structure, established processes where you can learn way more about how you can build like a productive, healthy environment with a lot of transparency. Yeah, these were two of the main learnings, just applying the technical skills to solve an actual business problem and building relationships and open communication.
Mm, that makes sense. Yeah, I sit on the opposite side of that traditional dynamic where in my corporate work, I'm product management, so I'm the one overseeing a lot of that other stuff. But I definitely would agree with you that at least through my lived experience in the space, both of those things end up being really important. So when you, and I think that makes a ton of sense. And I feel like a lot of people who have more of a technical background, that's why they're in tech. They're excited about what you can build and what you can create. Did that change as you were fulfilling that CTO role? Did that change how you thought about even your just like creative process? Were you more over time, were you more dispositioned to think about, okay, what is the actual business application? Or did you stay grounded in that? I just think tech is cool. I'm going to just really focus on that and I'll let them rein me in when and where needed.
Yeah, I'm sure I had to take a lot of product decisions there as well. I was still really excited about the technical domain, about the technical part of the product. It was really technically challenging, and I really enjoyed writing all the code, working on all the designs. And also, we were a small startup. We had maybe five, six engineers, maybe a little more. So I really had to write a lot of code as well and deal with a lot of technical stuff. When I joined Google, this shifted a little bit. Now I'm thinking more about building these partnerships and growth of the product. So I'm making way more product decisions, like
Mm.
driving the product roadmap for the developer platform on my team and seeing the other side. Yeah, seeing your side.
I love that. Very cool. I want to jump in and dig into that statement you just made about things at Google being more productive and more transparent, or just that environment that creates that space. But before we do that, I'd love for you to just share at a high level, what is your responsibility at Google?
Yeah, so we're building a web framework called Angular. So in the front end space, there are a couple of big frameworks: React, Angular, Vue. I think these are the top three. There are a couple of other growing quickly, like fast growing frameworks, such as, let's say, Svelte and Solid. Angular is a JavaScript or a TypeScript framework that allows you to build user interface. So you can just compose components together so that you can build user interfaces. It is used by ClickUp, Delta, Morgan Stanley, BlackRock, by a lot of large and smaller companies. And it is a product that we're building for developers. It is open source. We're building it on GitHub and syncing it in the Google model repo pretty much daily, where it is used by over 4,000 projects, including Google Cloud, let's say, which they have millions of lines of code. So my role there is to lead developer relations for the product and drive the product roadmap. So I guess having two hats there, developer relations and product.
Very cool. Very cool. So I have to ask this as a product person, but having never really worked on anything open source. And I think for a lot of listeners, probably people have heard the word Angular, maybe more so as a buzzword rather than like having really had experience with it. Where do you pull, how do you create a roadmap for something open source? And I'm just, and not that there's a right answer, but I'm curious because I think oftentimes there's probably a different approach when it's something that's open source. It's not like a financial, necessarily driven by financial models. What are you looking to when you're thinking about inspiration or data driven decision making for your roadmap?
Yeah. Yeah, we have a lot of sources of data. Sometimes could be a little overwhelming. And also what you brought up, something that doesn't necessarily drive revenue, it's harder to justify investment, let's say even. Why would we get more headcount if we are not driving ads business directly? For example, that's a challenging question to answer as well. With the roadmap specifically, yeah, there are a lot of signals we're getting from GitHub, from the GitHub issues. We're also in the DevRel team. People are flying for a lot of conferences, collecting feedback there as well. Collecting feedback from enterprises. We connect with our enterprise customers regularly on a regular cadence, and also talking to all the internal teams at Google. And we also have some partnerships that we would like to grow with internal Google teams. Let's say Firebase is one such platform with which we work very closely. There are a lot of initiatives around AI and like different AI products that we would like to support. So taking all this together with our like relatively like small team and finding the intersection between all this after prioritizing it is sometimes not very trivial. And also, once we prioritize it and make this roadmap, put it together, making sure that we're getting approval and validation of the roadmap and bringing everyone on the same page to align on the top initiatives with our top partners, with leadership, and within the team. It's a fun process.
It always is. It's never easy. It's always
Yeah.
complex. This is super cool. So I would love to hear from you, and I'd love to dissect this like a few layers deeper when it comes to getting that buy-in. Like you mentioned, with an open source project, it requires maybe an extra level of convincing. But actually, let's take even a further step back. Why do you think companies invest in open? Because a lot of people listening probably don't even have that much exposure to open source. Why do companies like Google create budgets for projects that don't create any cash flow and they are just open source?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, Google could be a good example, but also the company is 180,000 people, so it's a large company, has a lot of revenue from other sources, and spending a couple of millions of dollars for an open source project might not be a big deal for them. But for startups, I see that as being like a major trend right now. You can see that in startups such as, let's say, Vercel. They're building a cloud platform. You can see that in Shopify is doing that. Netlify, there is a new startup that emerged lately. They raised maybe $10 million seed funding called Bun. Builder.io, they're building another open source framework as well called Quick. I see that a lot of startups use their open source as a way to onboard new customers to their platforms.
Mm. So it's sort of
That's
like
pretty
a
much maybe
it's like
the
a
main,
lead
yeah.
magnet type of like foot in the door, get the people into your ecosystem. Because there has to be some sort of revenue model behind it somewhere down the line. Like here's a ton of free value, and then you can engage with us in other ways. Is that what a lot of these companies are doing?
Yeah, that's part of it. And also building developer trust. If you're using the product of a startup and you really trust their technical expertise, and if the developers who are using this product, they're part of they're kind of decision makers, whether certain companies should be using the services of the startup building this open source project. It's a pretty kind of impressive driver for adoption.
Mm, I could see that. In a world where there's so much clickbait and everyone's trying to get your attention, building genuine trust can go a really long way.
Yeah, a good example there is Vercel. They built a wrapper around React, for example, which is really well integrated with their cloud offering. And you can very easily start building an application with Next.js, the wrapper around React, and deploy it to Vercel's cloud platform and be really well optimized for it.
Hmm, super cool. And let me
So
just
we
ask,
can apply the
okay,
same for Angular. Yeah.
very cool. Um, is there with open source, does it also, because you mentioned trust, does it also create a sense of community? Like, because when you have an opportunity to engage with open source, I feel like there's a lot of like back and forth. I'm not a developer, so I'm guessing here, but like a lot of GitHub conversations or things like that, or like Discord conversations around certain frameworks, like really create an even deeper connection with the company or the product?
Yeah, yeah, that's one of the my main reasons why are we investing so much in Angular and the open source community because Angular is heavily used at Google, and a lot of these developers at Google, over 2,000 people who are using Angular, maybe more actually, maybe 4,000. They're building constantly like large applications. They face really similar issues, like challenges as all external developers who are using Angular. And our team, we can't possibly provide all the documentation in the world and all the tools. So by building the Striving community, we can just expand on the capacity of what our team can offer. There are a lot of open source resources that can provide you training materials or a lot of libraries. So this community is really helpful in this sense. And yeah, another opportunity there is also around recruitment. If you have a lot of engineers, just like Google and you, back in the day when Google was hiring, when you need new Angular, when you need developers, just you're probably Google is using Angular heavily. We can find through open source a lot of very high quality candidates who can be productive at
Mhm.
Google very quickly.
Wow, that's so interesting. It's never something I've thought about, but that's probably still, even though Google's not hiring that way right now, a lot of other companies probably do, right? They're probably monitoring their own versions of that. And so it's like a
Yeah,
win-win.
yeah,
Very cool. That's awesome. Okay, so that's why companies are willing to invest in open source in general. And it's cool that we've teased out a few of the different value propositions of open source. So for you as a product leader, needing to pitch this investment to your senior leadership when they obviously have different initiatives that they have to spread resources between. Caveat, Google has a ton of money that they can invest in these type of things. But I'm curious for you, how are you creating that? What is your narrative for getting buy-in on some of these things? Because of course you're not really pointing to a revenue driver, or maybe there are certain sub features and things that do create revenue within it. But yeah, I'd just love to hear your thought process on how do you, even though it's maybe not a financial value, how are you, what is the value prop you're communicating to, or you're delivering to them?
yeah, yeah. I mentioned a couple of them already with being able to support a recruitment pipeline at Google, let's say, and potentially onboard more developers to Google Cloud Services. Here, there is also a tricky balance because we can't build integration. If we build, let's say, if the default deployment platform from the Angular CLI, Angular Command Line interface, is to Google Cloud, this is going to seem unethical. We're going to lose developers' trust. They might want to be building applications with Angular, but be using AWS or Azure or anything else. So there is a tricky balance. We also don't want to lock developers specifically to one platform. We want to enable them to build for and deploy it wherever they want. But often, one company provides a really well integrated stack that it just makes sense to deploy to, let's say, Google Cloud or Firebase. That's the case with Vercel, for instance.
Hmm, I love that.
The thriving community is just like building a successful open source project. Just as I mentioned already, build some interest in the developer community, brand recognition, and makes developers more excited to join Google as a company and get hired by us.
Hmm, I love that.
These are some of the reasons. I would say mostly the value proposition is around onboarding developers to different cloud services.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Just if that's where the overall, it's not really a market, but like the overall culture of software is open source is a valuable thing. Developers are looking in that ecosystem for what cool tools are there to operate. So if your company can be associated with one of those and add a ton of value to people and also do it in an ethical way, it's almost this reverse psychology thing that brings you more people into your space and wanting to work with you and wanting to work with your tools.
Yeah.
Very cool. Awesome. I want to jump back to something you said earlier when you were talking about your shift between Rhyme and Google. And you said you learned a lot about how teams operate, Google being more productive, a healthy environment with transparency. Of course, I'm sure there's things that some things you can and can't speak to, but I'd love to hear, is that, I assume you're speaking to ways of working in a sense of like the way teams operate, whether it's like documentation or systems. But I'd be curious to hear what were some of those light bulb aha moments that really make you think, oh, this is like a best practice way to orchestrate an engineering team. or the interaction between engineering, product, et cetera?
Yeah, Google has, I would say, pretty simple process overall to for planning and for check-ins with the people on your team and performance process as well. That has been refined for many years and it continues evolving. For example, when I joined, we had one process for performance review. Now we have another one that is more minimalistic and I would say even more efficient that we're going through right now for Q3. And just the basic things, just such as like setting annual KPIs and quarterly OKRs for the team. That's following this OKR framework with objectives and key results. Having the performance process with regular check-ins, like once a quarter on the expectations for everyone on your team, and making sure that they have been accomplished or they have been reflected if the business priority has changed. Having a really transparent process for uh, even for compensation. This has been great. And being like automated where it could be so that you can reduce the biases that are just natural for people. This attempt to reduce biases on every single level, I really appreciate it. We have unbiasing specifically in people discussion for promotion and for performance reviews that are extremely valuable.
Ooh, that's
Yeah,
super
just a
interesting.
couple of examples.
If we can go into details, awesome. And if we need to keep it high level, totally okay. But with that, I'm just very curious because that sounds awesome. The ability to remove that bias of who should get promoted is not based on your how much you like that person or whatever. Does that mean you guys are using algorithm type tools or you're like looking at the actual metrics? I don't know if it's like velocity metrics of the code they're producing or things like that. Is it is that what you mean? There's data being collected on the back end about work performance, and it probably has something to do with those performance review data, things like that. But decisions are being made on that rather than the manager making those decisions.
Oh yeah, it's the decisions are made by a committee in general. That's for hiring and also for, let's say, for promotions. There is a well-defined ladder for the different roles. There is a ladder for product managers, ladder for software engineers. So there are different levels there, and for every level there are like clear set of like responsibilities or role or like expectations for you that you need to be achieving at the specific level. And with your manager at the beginning of the year, let's say you just sit together and you define your expectations for the year that align with your ladder and are designed so that you can make a significant impact in the organization. That's pretty much how it works. And from there, in case you exceed your expectations, you're going to get a higher performance rating. In case you decide to go for a promotion, you're pretty much you're looking at the next level and the responsibilities there and showing, like proving with your work that you have met the expectations for the next level, met the requirements for the next level. And in the process, it is a pretty collaborative process because your manager is going to support you for this potentially
Mm.
if they believe that you have met the requirements. And there is going to be a discussion in a larger group where everything is being carefully reviewed and there is an unbiasing, the so-called unbiasing champion that is going to make sure there are no biases because someone is, let's say, more familiar with your work or they're higher, they have proximity bias, they have been working closely with you or whatever. There are a variety of different biases and a lot of different unbiasing trainings that we're going through.
Right.
And yeah, this committee is going to make a decision at the end.
Very
That's how
cool.
it works. Similar
Nice.
way recruiting.
Nice. That's cool. It sounds like best practice being, and you said it, transparency, but now I'm understanding like what you mean by that. So it's like very clear on how you can get to the next level. So everyone is very like everyone's reading the same handbook and there's no interpretation of that. And there's no, I think there's probably been a bias in most companies over the years of lack of clarity leading to more power by leadership of I can keep them where I want them or I can move certain people up. But if it's just a very clear ladder system of, hey, if you can perform this way, we're very willing to, you can get those returns. I think that sounds really helpful.
Yeah, and just as humans, we have biases. It's just like there is no way out entirely. But like doing our best to be aware of these biases and pointing them out when we see them. This has been probably one of the more powerful things.
Mm, I love that. One thing that I heard you share when you were talking about just the systems in general, a word you used a few different times was minimalistic. So just to pull that up a level. Would you say that is something like, do you attribute a lot of the success around these systems across the board, whether it's code or hiring or like promotions? Does it seem like Google is constantly thinking about how do we just make this as minimal as it needs to be to still be effective?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I wouldn't say everything is absolutely minimalistic at this point, but there is constantly we're- there are different a lot of people putting thought into how we can make it more efficient.
Mm,
And yeah, there was a big shift recently in the performance review system that made it significantly reduce the boilerplate there significantly.
that's nice. Very cool. Those were a lot of the big questions that I wanted to chat with you about, and we tore through them pretty quickly. Is there anything else about so when you think about the future of open source, what are you most excited about? And that you can interpret that within your own project or just the community as a whole.
Yeah, there is a lot of open source is influencing a lot these new large language models. We have a lot of code out there that is open, and I see there are pretty tricky like legal implications training large models on these huge data sets of like source codes that has been contributed by many different people. But also it's really powerful as well, just because like we have these large data sets and they will enable us to train really powerful models that would um, accomplish a lot in a lot of different spaces. That's something that I've been seeing lately. And generally around open source, something that I have been excited about for many years is the equal opportunity it provides. Because it doesn't matter where you're physically in the world, you can be working with some of the best experts in particular fields and growing your skill set. This is specifically if you're an engineer, let's say.
Mm.
Yeah, this has been one of the most powerful aspects of open source I've observed over the years.
So like ease of accessibility. If you're a hungry engineer, you can get in and start rubbing shoulders with some extremely talented people.
Yeah, let's say at Google, you can be very lucky to be in a team with some like world famous engineer who has won a Turing Award, which is the equivalent of a Nobel Prize in computer science. And actually, you don't have to be working at Google in order to work with this engineer. You can just open a repository on GitHub to which
Mm,
this engineer is contributing. You can fix one of the issues that the engineer they are less excited about, and you can get code review directly from them, which would be wonderful. Like you can get mentorship from the best specialists in the world from the comfort of your home, wherever you are.
so
It provides value also. A lot of this, a lot of this software is being used in a lot of different places. Like Angular has 2.8 million developers who are constantly building new products with the framework. So
2.8 million
the way I
developers.
was working from Bulgaria, yeah, we
That's
have
wild.
about 2.8 million developers,
Very cool. Sorry, I cut you off.
and
Finish.
they're building hundreds of thousands of applications. So millions of applications. I don't know. I don't know how many. It's hard. It's hard to estimate because a lot of these applications are behind firewalls. Yeah, so the way, let's say I was contributing to Angular in my spare time back in the day from Bulgaria, I was making impacts in all of these like millions of applications that these like millions of developers were building. So it's a great way to build your skill set and make an impact.
Mm,
And we discussed the monetization aspects. They don't necessarily go hand to hand together. As a solo developer, I'll say you can build your skill set and you can find contracting opportunities and potentially even start a business around that. A good example is the startup bond that I mentioned.
very cool. So interesting. So how do you, and this is probably, maybe this is a really dumb question because I'm not a developer, but if I were a new engineer or a young engineer and I was curious about getting started on my first open source project, how would I go about finding the right one? Like, where do you start? Do you start with just your excitement and then just do a bunch of Googling on GitHub, or how do you find the right open source project to participate in?
Yeah, it's a great question actually. Yeah, if you're using a tool on a day-to-day basis, this might be probably the best starting point just because you're feeling some sense of connection with this product and you might be willing to invest more in it. And you have a look at the issue tracker. Often open source projects they have issues for newcomers that are relatively relatively easy and you can give one of these issues a try. Sometimes they're also challenging though. Like we shouldn't be getting frustrated if they seem too hard because often getting familiar with a code base that is a couple hundreds of thousands of lines of code is painful. But an opportunity to contribute there is the documentation. Just you find a typo in the documentation of a project and you fix it and you get your contribution in. That was my first contribution to Angular back in 2011 or so.
That's so wild. And you've come a long way since then.
It
Very
was
cool.
to open this pull request, just added one missing brace. That was the whole thing.
That's so funny. Wow. Okay. So I think I actually have to ask another really dumb question as someone who's just like really new to the open source concept. So obviously, if you're on a regular, like a traditional product, the people who work on it and who actually write the code, it's like it's part of the software development team internally. So I didn't really fully even comprehend how open source works until you just said that. So how is that managed or how is it I don't even know the right way to phrase this question, but okay, if I want to get involved and I want to submit a request to make some code change, like who's monitoring that? Is that your team?
Yeah. Yeah, the governance is it's actually a really big topic. It's pretty tricky in open source. It's not trivial at all because you may want to make a change that doesn't align with the vision for the product. And it gets tricky. You can put many hours, dozens of hours in making a change that just doesn't align with the project's goals and the change may not end up being merged by the team managing this product.
Mm,
At For Angular, this is the Angular team.
yep.
And it's pretty frustrating. So that's why I usually encourage people if they want to see a change, they first open an issue and the team can discuss this issue, see whether it makes sense. And from there on, if we agree, we can mentor the person to introduce the change.
So cool. So in theory, anyone who wants to get involved in an open source project, the initial example you gave is like fixing a small defect or something, but you can also propose like a big improvement or enhancement that you could work on and you could mentor and support them to go and make that change too.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that's usually, it's possible. We have like a lot of examples where people have made this jump from a small contribution to a larger feature. You even feature a lot of these developers who have been um, making their jump in our feature blog, in our version release blog posts.
Hmm. Love it. Well, thank you for answering my like open source 101 questions to help me really understand a little bit more about how all this stuff works.
No, there
Very
are good
cool.
questions. A lot of occur very frequently.
There you go. Good. Okay. I feel less alone. I just want to answer one last fun question or ask you one last fun question before we wrap up here. Because AI is just the biggest hot topic, what is your take on where's AI going in general? What are you most excited about AI and its potential impact in our culture over the next decade or so?
Generative AI, I see a lot of potential there. So really curious to see what is going to happen there. I see how we can get a lot of content generated, personalized for us, which has its trade-offs for sure. So that's where I see a lot of applications and probably a lot of regulations as well in the future. In the engineering space, I see a lot of opportunity around improving developer experience, just transitioning one code base from one language to another or one framework to another and supporting our development process so that we can just stop doing the boring stuff, automate it with AI, and focus on what is interesting.
Hmm. I love hearing you say that. That's been my general consensus. Of course, not that specific use case, but when you have these like fire alarm ringing humans that are like, we're all going to lose our jobs to AI. But at least in the product space, I feel very similar where these tools are fantastic. They automate all of the work I don't really want to do. And we can think more creatively rather than being bogged down in just like execution based things. So it's cool to hear you sharing a similar sentiment. Like you don't see a future where there's no coders and it's just GPT robots doing the whole thing.
Definitely not in my lifetime for now.
We'll take it. All right. You heard it here first, guys. Very cool. Glad to hear that. Is there anything else that you want to share that we haven't covered today? Anything you think is like really relevant or even just a tip for anyone who's pursuing a tech career, just given your journey and your experience, maybe what you wish you had heard as a mid 20 something embarking on your early career?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we covered a lot. We covered the like basics of Rhyme. We covered the role at Google around managing the products and DevRel. and open source. I really enjoy this topic. I'll say something that would have been helpful to me back then, and I realized over time is just like getting your work out there and not thinking that all the other people are some geniuses and are going to creating way more amazing content and like software than you. It's just everything is about like consistency practice. And yeah, just get your work out there so that you can build your network and get recognized and visit and noticed. I'll
Mm,
say that's mostly it.
love that.
There is a great talk at Google I/O called "The Myth of the Genius Programmer." I think back from I think maybe around early 2000s, maybe. It's a fantastic talk that discusses this in detail. A lot about the imposter syndrome, a lot about this myth of these geniuses in Silicon Valley or wherever who are just naturally talented, building phenomenal products. It's more of a myth rather than a reality. So yeah, just
Mm,
keep doing whatever you're doing and get it out there.
love that. So it's not those born with the skill set, it's those who are willing to get over the fear and just take a bunch of action, get excited about a problem. I can resonate with that. I feel like anyone who can get excited enough about a problem will find a way to solve it better than all the other people who are not excited about that problem, even if they're not the most naturally gifted.
Yeah. Yeah, and the setbacks as well, because nothing is easy. Everything is pretty hard. So just if it doesn't work out the first time, just keep going and just realize that it's hard. Just don't think that for some people it's trivial. It's not easy for anyone.
Mm, I love that. Minko, it's been really great chatting with you. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your experience launching Rhyme and also your open source experience at Google. I know I've learned a ton from this conversation. Are you active on LinkedIn or anything like that? If people have heard this conversation, they're curious about this world, where can we send those people to scratch their itch? We'll obviously share this talk you just shared.
Yeah, I'm active on LinkedIn. My LDAP there is mgechev, Mgechev. Same on Twitter or x.com. And also on GitHub, if there are some colors out there
There
who
we
would like
go.
to
That's
see
the
my GitHub
place,
contributions.
guys. Go check them out on GitHub. Yeah, we'll share all that down below. Awesome. Minko, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it and hope you have a great day.
Thank you very much for having me.
Mm.